There are places in this world that no map dares to name. Flint Hollow, Kentucky, is one of them. 8 seconds. That's all it takes for you to know this story was never meant to surface. Not in public, not in light, and certainly not in your ears. What you're about to hear is dangerous, because once you know, you can't unknow. In 1874, an old foundation was unearthed on a hillside pasture in Flint Hollow. Beneath it, buried under decades of root and stone, they found a sealed cellar lined with iron hooks and bones. Human bones, small, light, unbroken, laid perfectly straight. Local officials sealed the site. Newspapers printed nothing. But somewhere, in the charred ledger of an unburned church, one name echoed like a rusted bell: Delaney. What you're about to witness is not history as you were taught. It's not folklore. It's not superstition. It is a system, a method, a code, one that rewired children from the inside out. You will hear of harness rooms and alignment rites, of dowels, spines, and oil, of townspeople who mistook stillness for salvation, and a family that never blinked. This isn't just a story about a forgotten Kentucky town, it's a blueprint. Because what happened to the children of Flint Hollow is happening again. Different tools, same doctrine. Watch closely, because every word in this script is a pin pulled from the scaffolding of control, and by the time we reach the end, you won't walk the same way again. Now, straighten your back. It's time to descend into the macabre history of the Delaney Folds. The land around Flint Hollow was never known for abundance. It was dry, forgettable, a place where crops leaned more than they grew, but sometimes it's the most unremarkable soil that hides the deepest rot. The Delaney family didn't arrive in Flint Hollow. They returned. That's the part most historians miss. Their name first appeared in the records of Riverbend Parish in 1839, then again in 1841, but always scratched out, not erased. Scratched, as if someone wanted the name to vanish but not be forgotten. By 1874, no Delaneys remained in the census, but the ground remembered. That spring, Elias Woodford, a former cartographer turned recluse, leased a small plot of land near the overgrown chapel ruins. He intended to build a homestead, clear trees, raise chickens, simple life. But on his third day digging, his spade struck iron. He uncovered what he described in his journal as a lock plate, circular, rusted shut, cold as a tooth in winter. When pried open, it revealed not a chest but a hatch. Beneath it, a narrow descending shaft reinforced with wooden bracing and leather-strapped pulleys. No one had touched it in decades. And yet, the air rising from it was warm. Woodford wrote only 6 pages before he stopped writing altogether. But those pages, found years later stuffed into the hollow spine of an abandoned schoolbook, detail what he saw. Wooden slats, vertical, nails smooth, not hammered, but placed. Symbols above each bench, not letters, ribs, spinal shapes, a circle split by a line. On the far wall, a message, carved deep, not with hate, with discipline. It read, "We bend what God did not finish." What terrified Woodford wasn't the message. It was the feeling that someone was still listening. And when he tried to report it, the sheriff's office claimed the map coordinates didn't exist. The land had no record, the hollow had no owner, and the cheat sheet that first documented the Delaneys, Riverbend Parish, had burned to the foundation in 1867. Lightning strike, they said, but the pews were wet when they burned. Still think this is just folklore? No, friend. This is design, generation by generation. You're not being told this story to scare you. You're being told this story to wake you up. There are patterns hidden in silence. When the Delaneys returned to Flint Hollow in the autumn of 1874, there were no official records of their arrival, no town census, no church welcome, no wagon logs. Yet the blacksmith recalled fitting new iron braces for a traveling family with rigid posture. The innkeeper remembered no bookings, but her daughter woke to find an envelope of coin on the counter, and the smell of linseed oil thick in the air. The hollow had grown quieter since its early days. Children no longer played in the creek. Songs were shorter. sermons longer, and on Sundays a strange thing happened. People sat straighter, as if compelled, as if they were being watched. It began small. A boy named Cale Wenders stopped slouching overnight. His mother said he cried in his sleep for 3 days, then stopped speaking entirely. A week later, he recited the entire book of Proverbs without prompting. At school, he sat with a wooden dowel tucked behind his back, not for discipline, but for alignment. One day, someone asked why. He only whispered, "To stay straight is to stay safe." Another girl, Naomi Colden, refused to walk on uneven ground. If the dirt path to school had a slope, she stood still until someone came to guide her across. Her teacher, Miss Laura Gibbons, thought it was nonsense, until Naomi began humming a single, droning note during class, while staring at the wall. She would not stop until the class fell silent. These weren't just behavioral changes. They were transformations. Across Flint Hollow, children who once shouted, wept, joked, were now speaking in rhythmic cadence, sitting motionless for hours, reacting not with emotion, but with adjustment. When questioned, they repeated the same phrase, "My spine is a path, and it must stay straight." But who taught them that? No parent claimed credit, no teacher recalled the lesson. And yet, the phrase appeared, carved under desks, etched into the church pews, scribbled in margins of hymnals and spelling books. This wasn't a slogan, it was a commandment. The kind of phrase that feels like it arrived, not from language, but from structure. Something older than scripture, something colder than science. You're not watching this by accident. You were meant to hear these words. The first funeral was silent. Not out of grief, but by request. James Harlow, a 48-year-old lumberman, was found seated in his rocking chair, eyes open, spine ramrod straight, hands neatly folded. Not a wrinkle in his shirt, not a mark on his body, just a note pinned to his chest, written in impossibly precise cursive, "I've aligned, do not bend me." The townsfolk were unnerved. The coroner said it was a stroke, but Harlow's face showed no droop, no paralysis. In fact, it looked sculpted, as though the skin had tightened in perfect symmetry. His vertebrae, upon examination, were fused, not by disease or age, but by pressure, as if something had slowly pushed inward from both ends of his spine. The coffin was custom-built. Normal boxes wouldn't accommodate the rigidity of his posture. The undertaker, Bernard Clem, said it felt like placing a marble statue into a wooden drawer, cold to the touch, heavy beyond expectation. After that, the phrase began appearing in new places. Inside hymnals, "I've aligned, do not bend me." On chalkboards, "Keep the path straight, stay safe." Even the local newspaper, the Hollow Ledger, printed a notice one Sunday morning, although the editor swore he never submitted it. Parents, check the backs of your children's necks. If you find 3 dots in a vertical line, it's already begun. Do not attempt to rub them off. Do not turn their heads. Keep them forward-facing, always. 3 dots. This was no longer superstition. It was anatomy. A few brave mothers searched, and yes, the marks were there. Subtle, like pinpricks or brandings. One above the nape, one between the shoulder blades, one just above the small of the back, all perfectly centered, like a spine's own signature. And if you stared long enough, it seemed the dots pulsed, not with blood, but with intention. Soon after, church attendance doubled. Not from fear of God, but fear of deviation. People sat straighter in pews. They whispered less. Children folded their hands by default. The preacher didn't need to preach. He only stood still behind the pulpit, spine long and eyes wide. And still, the feeling grew. Something was watching. But it wasn't in the trees. It was in you. The children were the first to change. It began with silence during recess. Not the shy kind, but the obedient kind. They stopped running. No tag, no jump rope, just lines. Perfectly spaced, facing forward, hands at their sides, as if waiting to be counted. One teacher, Miss Talley, called it a phase, a new trend maybe. Military play, she told the school board, but when she asked little Emily Briggs why she stood so still, the girl simply whispered, I'm staying aligned. Emily never blinked during the conversation. When asked what that meant, she tapped the back of her neck and smiled, a slow, chilling curl of the lips. The school nurse found the same 3 dots. She traced them with a gloved finger, raised, warm, slightly magnetic. Her fingers trembled. By the end of the week, 9 children had them. By the end of the month, nearly every child in the district bore the mark, and all displayed the same behaviors: straight posture, forward gaze, minimal speech. No tantrums, no meltdowns, no complaints. Some parents celebrated it. Finally, some discipline, one father said. But others knew better. Discipline doesn't erase joy. It doesn't remove individuality. These weren't well-behaved kids. They were synced. Then came the drawings. Teachers started finding identical sketches in notebooks across grades. A towering, faceless figure made of long, symmetrical bones. Spine-like rods running down its limbs. Its feet weren't feet at all, just roots. Its hands, outstretched. Its back, perfectly straight. Every sketch bore the same caption, in childish handwriting: "The straight one is pleased." Superintendent Hemsley called an emergency assembly. She never made it to the podium. She was found in her car, rigid and cold, eyes open, mouth slightly parted, as if in mid-sentence. Pinned to her blouse was a post-it note. Same cursive, same warning: deviation leads to disassembly. The media never reported the incident. The local news station aired reruns that night. No anchors, no apology, no mention. And yet, the town knew. People stopped turning their heads on the street. Conversations were held face forward, words clipped and careful. The bookstore sold out of posture correctors. Chiropractors refused to work weekends. Because the deeper truth was sinking in. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a correction. The churches emptied next. Not because the people had lost faith, but because they feared the bend. Kneeling, bowing, even clasping hands in prayer, such gestures were no longer safe. Pastor Elias refused to change his sermons. "The Lord asks for humility," he preached one Sunday. "He asks us to kneel before him." The congregation stood silent, not out of reverence but fear. That same evening, Pastor Elias was found prostrate in front of the altar, arms stiff at his sides, his spine shattered, not broken but meticulously disassembled, vertebrae laid out like communion wafers down the church aisle. And on the pulpit, carved deep into the wood, "Humility Deviation." No one entered that church again. No one touched the pulpit, not even the cleaning crews. Dust gathered on the pews like ash. Stained glass wept with cracks. The bell fell silent, its chain severed cleanly, as if shunned from above. People began modifying their homes. Stools were thrown out. Beds were replaced with firm slabs. Sofas were burned in backyards at dusk. All furniture now faced true north, aligned with the axis, as people began calling it. Old men with canes vanished from porches. A yoga studio mysteriously exploded after a group dared to perform a child's pose. One man, a veteran with scoliosis, begged for forgiveness in front of town hall. He offered to wear a brace to undergo surgery to remain standing in his sleep. But the moment he bent down to tie his shoe, he collapsed. No blood, no scream, just a strange clicking sound, like gears retracting. When they rolled him over, his eyes were replaced with thin, polished discs of metal. Etched into one, deviation logged. Etched into the other, assimilation failed. That was when the townsfolk stopped resisting. Parents trained their toddlers to walk straight with books on their heads. Schools replaced PE with axi as exercises. Even laughter became brief, breath-controlled. No hearty chuckles, no belly-shaking wheezes. It wasn't just about posture anymore. It was about conformity, precision. And deep down, they all began to ask the same question, silently, privately, while lying still in the dark. Who or what was the straight one? And when did it first arrive? The town's library held the first clue. It wasn't in the books. The books were gone. Every last one, purged, pulped, or blacked out with tar-thick ink. Even children's picture books weren't spared. Curved letters, looping fonts, spiral illustrations, all violations. In their place stood rows upon rows of identical white volumes. No titles, no authors, no page numbers. Just crisp, bone-white pages with thin black lines running straight from top to bottom, vertical, unbroken. One librarian, a woman named Dana, who had worked there for 28 years, tried to hide a single copy of Charlotte's Web in the crawl space above the archives. The next morning, the entire second floor of the library had vanished. Not burned, not collapsed, just absent. Steel beams sheared like melted butter. The staircase ended in open air, and Dana, she was never seen again. In her place, a white book appeared on the front desk. This one had a single sentence: "Deviation breeds decay." People stopped asking questions, but 14-year-old Nathan Park couldn't let it go. His mother had once told him bedtime stories, stories full of dragons and curved swords and rivers that wound like ribbons. Now she stood in the hallway all night, rigid as a post, eyes locked on nothing. She hadn't blinked in 3 days. Nathan snuck out one night, flashlight in hand, and climbed into the wreckage of the library's missing floor. He found something impossible, a children's mural, peeling paint, cartoonish animals, rolling hills, a sun with a smiling face, all round, playful, curved. Underneath, written in what looked like red chalk, "The world was once soft." Then he heard it. A faint hum, mechanical, rhythmic, like breath, like machinery dreaming. And in the corner of the room, where the wall met the floor at a gentle curve, a shadow moved. Not away, not toward, just realigned. Nathan ran. He didn't speak for weeks. But at night, he began to stack the chairs in his room in spirals. He bent his arms in the mirror. He drew circles into the fog on the bathroom glass. He didn't know why. Something inside him did. The straight one had noticed. The countdown had begun. Nathan wasn't the only one who remembered. Not fully, not clearly, but something was waking in others too. Quiet rebellions born from a crooked line, a spiral doodle, a sudden urge to walk in circles instead of straight paths. They called it the twisting. And those who succumbed to it, they vanished, but not all at once. First, they would stop using doorways. They'd slip through windows, crawl under tables, speak in riddles, laugh at things that weren't jokes, smile with their heads slightly tilted, not out of madness but memory. Muscle memory from a time before geometry ruled the soul. And then, one night, they'd be gone. No noise, no trace. Just a perfect black circle drawn on the wall where they last stood. Nathan's friend Theo was the first to speak openly about it. He was 16. He'd been building birdhouses out of old scrapwood behind the school, all of them asymmetrical. The principal found them and crushed everyone with a mallet while the students watched. Theo didn't cry. He whispered, "The birds still know how to turn." That night, Theo placed his palm against the whiteboard in math class and traced a spiral with his index finger. Slowly, reverently, the board melted, not with heat, but with yielding. The surface turned pliable, soft as pudding. His hand passed through it, fingers stretching into a space that shouldn't exist. He smiled, whispered, "It's still there," and stepped forward. The whiteboard hardened behind him, and he was gone. The school issued a statement: "Theo has transferred." No one questioned it, except Nathan. He returned to the mural at the library, this time with gloves and rope and a strange resolve pressing down on him like gravity. He scrubbed at the peeling paint until he uncovered something deeper beneath it, not chalk, but carved letters, sharp, deliberate. Where straightness reigns, freedom dies. The message had been buried by 3 separate layers of paint. As Nathan stared at it, something snapped inside him. Not a thought, not a feeling, a shape. Something old, something coiled, something waiting. From the corners of his eyes, the library wall seemed to curve slightly inward, and then, very softly, he heard a voice, not in his ears, but beneath his skin. "Follow the bend." Nathan didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because his dreams were waking up before he did. He paced in figure eights on his floor. The spiral in his notebook had bled ink into the paper, soaking, growing. The more he tried not to look at it, the more it pulled. Not like a drawing, like a door. At 3:33 a.m., the spiral began to hum. No, not hum. Resonate. Not out loud, inside his bones. His closet door creaked open, not wide, just enough for a sliver of impossible black. From within, someone whispered in reverse. He snapped the closet shut, but the spiral kept resonating. In desperation, Nathan yanked his desk lamp cord from the socket. The spiral didn't care. He threw the notebook into the trash. It reappeared on his desk 2 minutes later, open to the same page. But now, in the center of the spiral, something new had formed. A tiny, intricate map, made of veins, and it pulsed. At school, things were worse. The hallways had angles that hadn't been there yesterday. Corners stretched too far. Some lockers leaned. A geometry teacher began coughing up chalk dust during a lesson on parallel lines, collapsed while drawing a triangle. When the nurse arrived, she said his eyes were perfectly round, with no irises. Nobody spoke of it. At lunch, Nathan sat alone, his tray untouched. He traced the spiral on his palm with his finger, even though he swore he'd never drawn it there. Suddenly, a voice whispered beside him. It's starting again. A girl, pale hoodie, dark eyes, no name tag. She leaned close and whispered, "The architects are waking up, the ones they buried, the ones who built without corners." Nathan tried to speak, but she slid something under his tray and vanished into the crowd. A folded piece of aged vellum paper, smelled like old fire. Unfolded, it showed a map of the school, but not the school as it was. The blueprint had extra corridors, hidden rooms, a stairwell that spiraled downward beneath the gym. At the bottom corner of the map, scrawled in red, "Meet me tonight, 4th bend past the impossible door." Nathan looked up. The spiral on his palm had started to rotate, on its own. The twisting had begun. Nathan waited until exactly 12:04 a.m. That was the time the girl's note had mentioned, if you knew where to look. 4th bend past the impossible door, the map had said. What could that even mean? He crept out of bed, every shadow in his room seemingly watching. Notebook in his jacket, flashlight in hand, palm still twisting. He reached the school in 20 minutes. The front doors should have been locked. They weren't. Inside, the halls were darker than night. Not no lights dark, wrong dark. A shade you don't see but feel. Cold, velvet black that moved when you stared at it. He followed the map, past the principal's office, past the janitor's closet that never opened. He found the door. It wasn't on any blueprint. A plain grey thing, narrow with a brass knob too warm to touch. Nathan took a breath, opened it. The stairwell behind it went down, and down, and down. More steps than the school had floors. The walls grew narrower the deeper he went, as if the building was folding inward. The air buzzed, like a mosquito in his skull. Then, the 4th bend. There, standing in the middle of the steps, was the girl. She didn't turn to face him, just whispered, "You kept the notebook. That's why it still follows you." Nathan asked, "What is it?" She finally turned. Her face looked almost normal. Almost. Her pupils were spirals, moving. She handed him a mirror. He looked. So were his. The girl pointed down the stairs. "They're waiting," she said. "They remember you from the last time." Nathan blinked. Last time? The walls around them groaned, wood twisted in unnatural ways. The girl began walking downward again, barefoot now. Every step echoed with a different voice, not hers, not human. Nathan followed. They reached a vast chamber beneath the gym. Impossible architecture, pillars upside down, ceiling made of black water that didn't fall. At the center, shared the architects. 7 figures, each cloaked in folds of language. Letters that crawled, symbols that bled, faces masked in spirals, some turning clockwise, some counter. And they spoke in unison. The blueprint must continue. It needs another witness. Nathan looked down. The notebook had opened itself. The page was blank again. The spiral waited. It was time to draw. Nathan's hand moved on its own. The pen trembled between his fingers, dragging black ink across yellowed pages that hadn't been there seconds ago. Each line he drew carved itself into his mind, like he wasn't creating, but remembering. The spiral took shape again, only this time it grew wider, deeper, dimensional. He wasn't drawing a shape, he was opening something. The architects surrounded him now, silent and swaying. Their cloaks made no sound, but the letters whispered to him anyway, each one a forgotten word from a dead language that still knew his name. Then came the girl's voice. "You weren't meant to leave last time," she said, "but you escaped, and the school punished the rest of us." Nathan looked up. The girl's feet weren't touching the floor anymore. Her body floated at an unnatural tilt, spine bent in a slow figure 8, eyes locked on the growing spiral. "You'll fix it now," she said, "or it will open without you." He didn't understand, but his hand kept moving. And then, a sound like teeth on metal. Something behind the spiral moved. Not metaphorically, literally. The page bulged. The floor beneath him rippled. His flashlight burst like glass under pressure, even though it was made of plastic. The architect spoke again. "A gate unfinished is a gate ajar." Nathan wanted to scream, but his voice was gone, replaced by that static buzz he heard in dreams he never remembered upon waking. Then something cold brushed his cheek. He turned. A hand. Not flesh, not bone, something between. It reached through the spiral, reaching not just into space, but time. And when it touched him, he remembered. He remembered the first time. He remembered being here before. A different body, a different name. The same drawing. He had opened it once already. He had let something through, and now it wanted him back. The spiral exploded in lightless color, a scream in geometry. The notebook snapped shut, and when he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was in a desk, middle of math class. Mrs. Brower was calling roll. "Nathan?" she asked. He looked down. The notebook was open in front of him. The spiral was gone, but underneath it in his own handwriting, "Welcome back." At first, Nathan thought it was a dream. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A pencil rolled off someone's desk. The chalkboard still bore the residue of half-erased equations. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. He looked at his hands. No ink, no dust. His desk wasn't ancient stone. It was beige plastic with gum stuck underneath. The other students didn't notice anything was wrong. They didn't see him shaking. They didn't hear the hum under the floor. And yet, he did. That hum had followed him back. Low, rhythmic, pulsing, like the sound of a heartbeat. If the heart were buried beneath concrete and screaming through time. "Nathan?" Mrs. Brower called again. He looked up. She was staring at him too intently. Her smile was stretched a little too wide. Her hand stayed perfectly still on the podium. Too still. No teacher stood that still. The hum grew louder. Nathan's eyes drifted toward the corner of the room where the window should have been. Except now, it was bricked shut, like it had always been. Except it hadn't. Except he remembered the trees, the track field, the stupid pigeons that always nested outside. Now it was just old, rotting bricks, covered in runes he couldn't have known, but now understood instinctively. He was still inside, still in the spiral, still in the school. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraped loud against the floor. Everyone turned to look, except they didn't have faces. Not anymore, just holes, where mouths should have been, where eyes had been. They began to speak in unison. Their words didn't need mouths. "Class is in session. Lesson 1, what you see is not what's real. Lesson 2, What's real will not stay hidden. Lesson 3. You never left. Nathan bolted for the door, but his feet wouldn't move. Because the tile had softened, turned to flesh. He looked down and saw faces beneath the key-in floor, his own face among them, all of them screaming. The spiral had come with him, or maybe he had never left it. Nathan screamed, but the sound didn't leave his throat. It echoed back inward, folding into his lungs like smoke. He clawed at his legs, trying to tear them free from the fleshy tiles gripping his ankles. The faces under the floor blinked. Some wept, others grinned. All of them were him. Time hiccuped. Mrs. Brower was no longer at her podium. She was behind him now, too close. Her breath coiled around his ear like steam from something long dead, but still warm. "Nathan," she whispered, "you're doing so well." He turned to face her, but her body had no back. It was hollow, inverted, like a doll that had been turned inside out and stuffed with whispers. From her chest, something emerged. A hand. Long, wet, slick with ink and bone. It held a book. And then it opened it. The pages were blank. Until they weren't. Until they showed him. Him in his room. Him scratching spirals into his mattress. Him watching himself through the mirror as the reflection refused to mimic him back. Each page told a story he hadn't lived, yet remembered. Each word pulled from his mind and written in a language that looked like wounds. He reached toward the book, compelled. His fingers brushed the page. Pain shot through his arm like 1,000 needles, but he couldn't stop. The book had teeth. It bit down on him, fed on him, and with every drop of blood it swallowed, the classroom changed. The walls began to melt, not collapse, melt, as if the room had always been made of wax and they had simply lit the wrong candle. The faceless students stood in rows now, chanting something in reverse Latin. Their voices merged into a single droning harmony, a sound that rattled Nathan's ribs from the inside. Then a crack tore through the ceiling. From it the eye returned, the same one from the spiral floor. It hung there, suspended, gazing at him, not watching, reading. It was reading the book too. It blinked, once, and all the windows in the room exploded outward, except they didn't lead outside. They opened to other classrooms, other versions of this room. In each one, a different Nathan stood. Some were dead, some were monsters. One was missing his skin, and one looked directly at him, smiled, and said, "We made it out, but not all of us stayed, Nathan." Nathan's knees buckled, the weight of 1,000 versions of himself staring, bleeding, grinning, screaming, collapsed onto his spine like wet iron. His breath came in tiny hiccups, not quite screams, not quite sobs, just noise, just static. In every shattered window he saw a different him. One floated upside down, twitching like a marionette underwater. One sat at a desk, fingers clawing endlessly at pages made of skin. One had no eyes, just 2 stitched spirals. One was smiling. Only one. That one reached through the window. His arm came out of the glass, straight into Nathan's classroom. Nathan stumbled back, but the air thickened like syrup. Every movement dragged like he was underwater, or in a dream that was becoming aware of him. The hand touched his face. It was warm, real, human, but the skin peeled away, revealing a silver bone carved with names, thousands of them. All his. Nathan R. Lowell, Nathan R. Loring, Nathan R. Litch, Nathan R. Lies. Each name pulsed with memory. Some lives flashed before his eyes that weren't his, but they were. He saw himself, chained in a white room as shadows with his mother's voice asked questions that couldn't be answered. Digging a hole in frozen earth, burying a second heart that beat out of sync with his own. Sitting in court, smiling as the judge banged the gavel and the jury clapped. Memories that never happened, but the pain of them was real. His teeth chattered. His stomach turned. "Why are you showing me this?" Nathan gasped. The smiling version of himself stepped all the way through the window now. Glass folded like water around him. He didn't walk, he glided, as if the rules of physics had grown tired of applying to him. "Because you're late," the smiling Nathan said. "We've all had our turn, now it's yours." Nathan backed into the teacher's desk, breath ragged. "My turn for what?" Smiling Nathan jumped his hand. Inside it was a spiral key. It rotated on its own, slowly, impossibly. The room around them dimmed until everything was lit only by the rotating spiral. A door appeared in the chalkboard, breathing gently. Nathan didn't remember standing, but now he was in front of it. Hand extended. And the key? Already turning in the lock. The spiral door cracked open, not like wood or metal, but like bone. It gave a brittle snap, followed by a long, wet peeling sound, as if something living had just been split in half. Nathan stepped through. Behind him, the door vanished. Ahead, a corridor made of mirrors stretched into infinity, but not ordinary mirrors. These surfaces didn't reflect him. They reflected moments, scenes, slices of time. He turned to one on his left. A boy about his age sat on a rusted swing, whispering to a noose hanging from the tree above. The noose twitched in response, like it was listening. To his right, a woman sat in a red-lit kitchen, placing his teeth, into envelopes, each marked "Return to Sender." Nathan reached out, and as soon as his fingers brushed the glass, it liquefied. His hand sank into the moment, and suddenly he was there. The swing creaked behind him, the rope swayed, wind carried a voice that sounded like his own, layered 100 times over, whispering in reverse. Nathan pulled his hand back, breaking the connection. His breath was ragged. He stumbled forward through the corridor, passing dozens more mirrors, each worse than the last. He tried not to look, but the reflections dragged his gaze like gravity for the mind. One mirror showed his classroom, empty, decayed, covered in vines. A chalk message on the blackboard read, "He finally left." Another showed his mother at the dinner table, smiling blankly, feeding a baby with no face. He ran. Down the corridor, through the twisting hall of reflections that weren't. Faster, faster, until he crashed into himself. Not a reflection, not a hallucination, another him. This version was dressed like a surgeon, apron soaked, eyes glowing faint blue. "Stop," the surgeon version said, grabbing Nathan's arms. "You'll fracture us if you go any deeper." "What is this place?" Nathan choked. The surgeon, Nathan tilted his head. "This is what happens when you ask the wrong questions in the right place." He touched Nathan's forehead, and everything changed. Suddenly Nathan remembered building this corridor, not physically but psychically. Each mirror was a sealed memory, each door a locked trauma. He had done this to himself, and now one final mirror at the end of the hall stood cracked open. Behind it someone waited, someone wearing his skin. Nathan stepped towards the final mirror, each footfall echoing like a funeral bell. The glass frame hummed, vibrating with a low, animal groan, as if whatever was behind it didn't want to be seen, but needed to be. The crack in the mirror widened as he approached, spider-webbing outward. Something was moving behind the glass, not a reflection, not a trick of the light. A shape, a presence, a version of him he had never allowed himself to remember. He reached out, and this time, the glass didn't melt. It shattered. But instead of collapsing inward or falling away, the shards floated, suspended in midair like a galaxy of jagged stars. Nathan stepped through them, untouched. They turned, following him like eyes. The space beyond the mirror was void. Not black, not dark, just missing. An absence of place, time, and meaning. And there, floating in the center, was it. The other Nathan. It looked like him in shape only, but its features were off, like a mask sculpted by someone who'd never truly seen a human face. Its smile was too wide, its skin too smooth, stretched thin over something beneath that pulsed and writhed. Nathan couldn't breathe. He knew this place. He had locked it away for a reason. This was the first lie. The original moment he had buried so deep he forgot it existed. The other Nathan opened its eyes. "You finally remembered," it said in his voice, but deeper, wet, like it had learned to speak by mimicking cries from inside a well. "You left me here. You made me your secret. I watched every day you forgot me. But now," it said, floating closer, "you're breaking, and when you do, I walk out." Nathan trembled. "Why are you me?" The thing grinned. "Because I was the first one who knew none of this was real. Not your friends, not your school, not your mother. You created them to cover what happened." Nathan backed away, but there was no ground, no walls, just endless unbeing. The other Nathan reached out. "Let me back in. Let's finish what we started. Let's tell them the truth. Do you remember what it is yet?" Nathan's mind began to tear. Flashes, screams, a broken door, blood on a toy, a father's belt, a fire. He fell to his knees. The truth wasn't just buried, it was alive. Nathan screamed without sound. The void didn't echo. It absorbed. Each memory that surfaced from the depths of his mind came with a sharp stab, like glass pushing through skin. The past had teeth now. It gnawed at him. Images spiraled across the emptiness. A charred photograph. A woman's face, smeared with soot and tears. A boy's drawing, crumpled and burned. A doorframe stained red. The other Nathan circled him like a shark, voice echoing from everywhere. "Why do you think the mirrors never showed the full truth?" "Because you wouldn't let them. You fractured yourself to survive." Nathan's lips trembled. "I didn't know what I did. I didn't." "You did," the other Nathan said, stopping inches from his face. "You made them forget. You made you forget. But forgetting doesn't make you innocent." Nathan could feel something clawing at the edges of his sanity. A memory so devastating it had split his soul. And then he saw the match. The match he had struck in the shed. To scare him, he had told himself. Just smoke, just a warning. But the fire had spread, faster than he expected, and someone was still inside. His younger brother. Nathan gasped. No, I tried to save him. I ran in." "You watched," said the other Nathan, eyes black and endless. "You froze. You left the door closed. I was 6. You were old enough to run away, but not back in." Silence followed. Crushing. Suffocating. Nathan fell to his knees, the weight of his buried guilt finally landing with the force of a collapse. He had spent his whole life building a mental maze, mirrors, doors, stories, people, all to lock this away. And yet here it was, the core, the rot beneath the floorboards of his mind. "So," the other Nathan whispered, crouching beside him, "what happens now?" Nathan looked up, eyes filled with tears that burned. "If I let you in, what will you do?" The thing said, mild, not cruelly but sadly. "What you should have done a long time ago. Stop hiding, face them, face you." The void shifted, and suddenly Nathan could see every version of himself he'd left behind, cowering in mirrors, trapped behind cracked glass, begging to be understood. He had run for years, but running hadn't erased the past. It had only multiplied it. He stood, trembling, and said the words that would change everything. "I'm ready to remember, all of it." The moment the words left Nathan's lips, the void pulsed. Like a living thing, it reacted, not with rage, not with violence, but with something far more terrifying. Acceptance. The other, Nathan smiled. Not cruelly, not with triumph, but like a father seeing his son take a step. "You don't understand yet," it whispered, "but you will. Remembering isn't the punishment, it's the beginning." The darkness around them began to fracture. Thin, glowing fissures split across the surface of the void like spiderweb cracks in blackened glass. Light, sickly at first, then golden, bled through. And then, the sound of footsteps. Hundreds, Thousands. Marching. All versions of Nathan. Children, teens, old men, ghostly and broken, emerged from the cracks, stepping into the center like echoes of a life disassembled. Each bore the weight of a specific memory, a trauma, a lie. They didn't look at him, they merged with him, one by one. Each time a memory touched him, he convulsed. His spine arched, his skin rippled with past pain. He relived every scream he'd silenced, every sin he'd buried, every face he'd erased. The burning door, the forgotten hospital, the pills, the night with the rope. The voice that told him, "You're worthless." All of it returned. Nathan screamed, arms outstretched, body glowing with unbearable memory. He didn't fight it, not this time. He let it pierce him, tear him open, until there was nothing left to hide behind. And then, silence. A different silence, not void, not numb, stillness. He was standing in the center of a mirrored circle, but this time none of the reflections turned away. None blinked, none distorted. They were all him. Not the parts. The whole. He whispered, "I'm still here." The other Nathan nodded. "You made it. Most don't. They break before they remember, but you've always known this place was waiting." Nathan looked around at the mirrored selves. They nodded back, some with grief, some with forgiveness, but all with the quiet understanding that the war was over. The other Nathan stepped forward. "I'm not your enemy," he said gently. "I never was. I was your witness, your memory, your truth." Nathan asked, barely above a breath, "Then what happens now?" A mirror behind him shattered, not violently, but like a shell breaking. Behind it, a door. Wooden, old, familiar. The door to the house, the one from the fire, the final threshold. The other. Nathan stepped back. "This time, you walk through it with open eyes." Nathan turned to the door, hand trembling as it reached for the knob. His fingers touched the wooden doorknob. Aged, splintered, warm like skin. The door wasn't just wood and hinges, it pulsed faintly under his hand, alive with memory. Nathan closed his eyes. The breath he took felt realer than any breath before it. It tasted like smoke, childhood, and endings. And then, he turned the knob. The door opened. Not into fire, not into ruin, but into the hallway of his childhood home, perfectly preserved. Wallpaper faded at the edges, a crooked painting of a boat on the sea, the floorboards that always creaked near the third step, the smell of oatmeal and dust. The world felt quiet, but not empty. Somewhere down the hallway a soft voice hummed a lullaby, familiar, the one his mother used to sing before the screaming began, before the pills, before everything shattered. He walked forward. Each step echoed not with fear, but remembrance. The corners of his mind no longer blurred, no shadows waiting to leap. The hallway was no longer a trap. It was his story, finally whole. He reached the living room. His mother sat on the couch, exactly as he remembered from when he was 6. Hair undone, eyes tired, smile, fragile but real. On the floor, a little boy played with wooden blocks. Him, little Nathan. The boy looked up at him. No fear, no confusion, just a kind of quiet recognition, as if he'd always been waiting. "You found me," the child said. Nathan knelt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I left you here. I forgot you." The boy reached out, small fingers curling around his hand. "You didn't forget. You just weren't ready to remember." A tear slid down Nathan's face, but it wasn't born of sadness. It was relief. Grief with its teeth finally pulled. They sat together, man and boy, on the living room floor. No darkness, no monsters, just quiet. Then the house began to fade. Not with horror, with peace. The walls melted into light, the pain, or furniture into stars. His mother smiled one last time before becoming part of the warm, golden haze. And as the little boy looked up one last time, he whispered, "You can go now. I'll be okay." Nathan stood, whole. The void was gone. The other Nathan gone. Just himself, no longer hiding from himself. He stepped forward into the white, into the unknown, but this time, it didn't feel like death. It felt like beginning. When Nathan opened his eyes again, he was lying on the cold ground. The stone altar beneath him was cracked, slick with dew. The torchlight from the ritual circle had long since died out. Above him, the night sky churned. Not black, but deep violet, scattered with stars unfamiliar to Earth. He blinked. Was he still there? Was this the real world? The woods were silent. No wind, no whispers, no unseen force breathing down his neck. Nathan sat up slowly. His skin was whole, no cuts, no bruises. His chest, once heavy with dread, felt light, as if the centuries of inherited fear had finally been pulled off his shoulders. He looked around. The forest surrounding the ritual site was different. The trees were older, their bark glowing faintly with bioluminescence. Where the obsidian monolith once stood, there was now a ring of mushrooms, pulsing like a heartbeat. In the center, something was growing. A tree. Small, yet impossibly ancient. Its roots dug into the same soil where the others had tried to pull him under, but now, instead of darkness, it radiated warmth, life, truth. He approached it cautiously. Carved into the bark were symbols, not just letters but memories. Each swirl, each notch told a story. His story. The bloodline curse, the haunting of the island, the creature that had worn his face, the reconciliation with his childhood self. All of it recorded here, in bark and breath. This wasn't just his healing. This place, Jekyll Island, had been waiting for someone to remember, to repair, to rewrite the wound buried beneath its sands. Nathan placed his hand on the tree. The visions came, not like before, not violent or broken, but whole, cinematic, real. He saw a future, not utopia, but not doom either. A girl standing on the shore, watching the sunrise through silver fog. A family rebuilding the ruins, not for wealth, but for restoration. He saw his own reflection in the water, not as Nathan the haunted, but Nathan the keeper. The cycle had ended. He was no longer prey to ancestral shadows. He was their witness, their translator, their end. Behind him, the night began to hum, a low, harmonic note, like the world exhaling after a long-held breath. And then came the sound of waves. The ocean was returning. Real this time. The waves rolled in slowly, deliberately, like a tide that knew its place and time. Nathan turned toward the sound, his feet sinking slightly into the mossy earth beneath him. He could see the ocean now, just beyond the trees. It shimmered under the alien constellations, its surface unnaturally smooth, like glass poured over eternity. He made his way down a narrow path that hadn't been there before. The forest didn't resist him anymore. Where thorns once tore at his skin and branches grabbed like skeletal hands, now the trees swayed gently to part for him, whispering their approval. Each step forward felt like walking deeper into himself, as if his soul had been fragmented and scattered throughout the land, and now it was being returned to him, piece by piece. The shoreline was empty. No footprints, no ruin. Only silence, and that strange violet sky reflecting in the water. Nathan stepped onto the sand, half expecting it to collapse under him into a pit of writhing darkness. But it held. It was solid, real. He approached the edge of the sea. A reflection met him there, not of his face, but of her. A girl. The same girl he had seen in the vision carved into the bark. She stood just beyond the tide, barefoot in a white dress that looked stitched from light itself. Her hair was silver blonde, eyes the color of the storm he remembered from his childhood, the one that had never come. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was language. Nathan's throat tightened. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who are you? What is this place? What happens next? But he couldn't move. The girl raised her hand slowly and pointed to the horizon. There, rising like a cathedral of bone and memory, was the silhouette of something. Not a ship. Not a city. It was an island. But not Jekyll. Not anymore. It was another place entirely. A place built from what was, left behind after the purge, after the ritual, after the veil lifted. It was a beginning. Nathan felt the pull, not the suffocating drag of the others, but an invitation, a promise. He looked back once toward the forest, the altar, the tree that now pulsed with memory. Then he stepped into the ocean, and the water welcomed him. No cold, no fear, only light, and the sound of a new story, just beginning to write itself. Nathan didn't walk on the water, he walked into it. The sea did not resist him. It parted slightly, embracing each step like it had been waiting centuries for his return. With every inch he sank, it was as if the salt was scrubbing away not just dirt or blood, but history itself. Every lie, every manipulation, every story that had ever been told about this land was being erased in reverse, unwritten by the waves. He could still see her, the girl, the vision, the echo, drifting just ahead of him without effort. Her dress floated like smoke in reverse, trailing strands of white mist behind her that didn't ripple but shimmered, like the edges of a dream you could almost remember. Then the sound returned, not the rustling forest or the wind across gravestones. It was music. No melody, no instruments, just tone. A frequency so low it made Nathan's ribs tremble. It wasn't coming from the ocean, or the air, or even the sky. It was inside him now. As though the moment he had stepped through that shoreline, the broadcast had begun again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a map. Flashes filled his mind, flashes of what came before. Before the treason. Before the vault. Before the men in masks who called themselves economists but wrote spells in balance sheets. He saw the original island, not the one that tourists photographed, but the island before time. Before the name Jekyll was attached to it, before the Georgia coast knew it existed. It had always been there. The others didn't build it. They found it. A relic. A leftover from a forgotten age when humanity still remembered how to dream collectively, when the boundary between thought and matter hadn't yet hardened into concrete logic. Nathan saw himself, not as a man, but as a flicker of energy in a line of custodians, generations who had each failed, each been consumed by the lie of control. But he was the last link. And the girl, she wasn't a girl, she was the key, not a person, not a god, but the embodiment of the code that once bound all things, the echo of the first dream humanity ever had, and the one dream the architects could never rewrite. She turned to face him now, no longer still, no longer silent. "Nathan," she said, but not with lips. The word resonated in the core of his bones. "You were never supposed to forget." And just like that, the sea fell away. He was standing on stone, an ancient platform, a temple submerged no longer, and below him, the machine began to wake. The platform pulsed beneath Nathan's bare feet, stone that should have been cold but radiated heat like a living body, not fire, not warmth, but remembrance, as if the ground itself was awakening with the recognition of a long-lost name whispered through time. The light returned, but not from above. It came from beneath. A slow, rising amber glow spilled through the ancient runes carved deep into the rock. These weren't decorations, they weren't language in any traditional sense, they were functions, keys, circuits, glyphs for a system older than circuitry, older than electricity, older than fear. The girl, or the shape of her, hovered just beyond the edge of the platform now, no longer guiding him, waiting for him. Her eyes weren't eyes, They were the same glow now, radiating that same unspoken hum, that frequency that now lived in every part of Nathan's being. He knelt, not from reverence, but gravity. The force beneath him was immense, a planetary weight pressing into his chest, but it wasn't punishment. It was like the earth itself was exhaling, recognizing him, accepting him. And then, the images came again. But not like before. This time, he saw everything. He saw the first vault, not made of steel or stone, but intention. A crystalline prison for a singular, powerful idea that belief itself could shape the physical world. The ancients knew this. They feared what would happen if that knowledge was ever taken out of balance. So they hid it, and every generation since had tried to find it again. The philosophers called it the logos, the mystics called it the word, the bankers, they just called it leverage, because they had found pieces of it, slivers buried in sound, symbols, and repetition. They couldn't rebuild the original machine, but they could mimic its effect, manipulate human thought through illusion and control, systems so complex they became invisible. That's what Jekyll Island really was. Not a retreat. Not a conspiracy. A test site. The girl stepped forward. Her glow intensified, the symbols around them spinning now, not physically but conceptually, reorienting time itself. You understand now, her voice echoed within him. Nathan nodded, though he couldn't speak. You are not here to awaken the machine, she said. You are here to turn it off. In the silence that followed, the sea around the platform began to drain, not naturally but purposefully, revealing spiral steps descending into blackness. The final descent. The vault was opening. Nathan stepped onto the first spiral stair, and the moment his foot touched it, everything above him, the island, the sky, even the stars, folded inward like pages of a forgotten book. The world didn't vanish, it withdrew, as if embarrassed by what it had become. The staircase led down into a hollow space that shouldn't have existed. Beneath the ocean's floor, beneath even tectonic memory, something vast had been carved, not by tools but by intention. The walls weren't made of stone, metal, or any element he could name. They shimmered like obsidian oil, but breathed like skin. Every step down pulsed with pressure, not just weight, history. He began to remember things that were never his. Cities that rose and burned before language. Wars fought not with weapons but with thought. Civilizations who unlocked the vault once before and paid the price in silence. And then it was there. At the base of the spiral was a chamber, perfectly spherical, impossibly black. The kind of black that erases form, depth, distance. Only in the center did something exist. A floating mechanism, not a machine in the mechanical sense, more like a living equation. Symbols danced around it, fractal and alive. The Logos core. Nathan's breath caught. It was beautiful, not in the way of art or nature, but in the raw truth it radiated. This was the source, not of currency or control, but of perception itself, the algorithm behind belief, behind fear, behind consent. And it was active. Hovering just above the core was a sigil, rotating slowly, glowing faintly. A single symbol, simpler than any he had seen, just a circle split down the middle. Binary, on or off. The girl appeared beside him again, no longer spectral, no longer distant. She was here, as real as breath, but her eyes were mournful. You must choose, she whispered. Nathan stared at the sigil. If he turned it off, he could fray it. Either world from its trance, break the illusion of structure, of debt, of power manufactured from air. The spell would shatter, but with it would go everything humanity had built on that illusion. Banking systems, governments, faith in false stability. The world would be free, but devastated. And if he didn't, the cycle would repeat. Hidden hands pulling strings, crises engineered, lives traded like numbers. The vault would remain fed by ignorance. Nathan reached out. His fingers trembled, The symbol flickered, reacting to his presence. Behind him, the ocean trembled. Above him, time held its breath. And in that moment, he chose. His fingertip brushed the symbol, and nothing happened. Or at least, that's what it felt like at first. No explosion, no blinding light, no roar of thunder or rupture of space. Just stillness, deeper than silence, deeper than death. Then the world exhaled. It began in the chamber walls. Those dark, oil-slick surfaces shimmered and cracked like old paint. A low hum vibrated through Nathan's bones. The sigil above the core dissolved into ash and light, folding into the equation beneath it. Something shifted, not externally, but in the very syntax of reality. Above, the ocean churned with unnatural rhythm. The vault wasn't just shutting down, it was rewriting itself, a release of pressure centuries deep, as if an ancient dam hidden beneath layers of psychological infrastructure had just burst. Images flooded Nathan's mind, not memories, pre-memories, blueprints of narratives yet to be written. A world without central banks, without the silent hand of fractional reserve systems, without the inherited slavery of credit-based economies. He saw grassroots movements rising, not fueled by revolution, but by realization. People remembering something they had never known, that value doesn't come from digits on a screen, but from time, effort, connection. But he also saw collapse. Markets crashing, panic, governments scrambling to assert control over a new and unquantifiable reality. The core had dissolved the veil, but it hadn't replaced it. That burden, that blank page, was now theirs. Nathan fell to his knees. The girl stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. Her voice echoed both from her lips and inside his mind. You opened the vault, not for treasure, not for power, but for truth. I don't know if I did the right thing, he whispered, choking back a knot of fear. You didn't do the right thing, she said softly. You did the necessary thing. A moment passed, and then the chamber began to collapse, not destructively, but as if it had finished its purpose. The spiral stairs faded, folding inward like a nautilus retreating into itself. The core flickered one last time, then blinked out. Nathan was rising, not physically but being lifted, through layers of space, through timelines and dreams, returning to the surface like a diver who had forgotten what air felt like. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying in the dunes, soaked in salt and sand. Above him, the stars had changed. He was no longer part of the world he knew, and neither was anyone else. The world was still, but it wasn't the same. Nathan sat upright, his hands sinking into the warm sand of the beach. The ocean whispered beside him, calm now, as if unaware that history had just buckled beneath its tides. The horizon pulsed with a faint, unnatural glow. The stars above, constellations he'd once known by name, had twisted, rearranged themselves into geometries he couldn't recognize. The sky had rebooted. He wasn't alone. Across the shore, figures began to appear, emerging as if peeled from dreams, some barefoot and dazed, some in suits, others in tattered uniforms. People from different times, different systems, all blinking, all staring at the new sky like lost children under a reborn moon. Nathan recognized one of them, Dr. Harper. She limped toward him, her lab coat torn, face streaked with sand and confusion. You saw it, didn't you? She said, her voice cracked like static. The release. The rewrite. He nodded, unable to form words. Something inside him still felt open, like his mind had been permanently left ajar. Thoughts that weren't his slipped in. Equations, languages, memories of futures not yet lived. Every face on the beach seemed to shimmer with potential, as if they were both people and ideas at once. Behind them, the dunes began to shift. Not from wind, from code. A lattice of bioluminescent patterns spread across the sand like circuitry, beautiful, alien, and alive. It wasn't just the vault that had reconfigured itself. The Earth, the very operating system of civilization, was sinking to a new frequency. Then came the first wave of questions. What happened to the markets? Why aren't our satellites responding? Who's in control now? Is this a dream? Nathan stood, swaying slightly. We're not in a dream, he said. We're in the answer to one. Because the truth wasn't just revealed, it had overwritten the lie. There were no governments anymore. Not in the old sense. No digital currencies controlled by invisible hands. No hierarchical chains wrapped in the illusion of democracy. There was only the question, what do we build now? And deep inside him, the girl's voice echoed once more, as gentle as wind through reeds. You weren't meant to destroy the world, Nathan. You were meant to set it back to zero. The others looked to him, not as a leader, but as a witness, a survivor of something far older than civilization. And somewhere in the distance, the first city of the new world began to rise. Not from concrete, but from consensus. They called it the city without a name, because to name it would be to limit it. The structures didn't rise from cranes or blueprints. They bloomed from the ground like memories made solid. Glass towers shaped like twisted helixes, bridges woven from vines of liquid metal, roads that adjusted their width based on how many feet touched them. It was as if the earth remembered what it had been before civilization, and now it was dreaming again. But the most shocking thing was that there were no leaders. No presidents, no CEOs, no cult of personality. Instead, something else guided the city. An intelligence, yes, but one diffused, ambient. Not an AI in the classical sense, but a neural democracy. Every human thought, voluntarily offered, was part of a living system of decision-making. The laws weren't written. They were felt. Policy wasn't voted on. It emerged from shared emotional consensus. Nathan watched a crowd gather at the center of the city. Not to protest, not to beg, but to merge. Their minds, sinking for moments at a time, experiencing a unity once only theorized in the deepest corners of forbidden science. This was no utopia. It was strange, it was vulnerable, but it was alive. Dr. Harper approached him again, now dressed in fabric that shimmered with her biosignature. We're calling this phase Epoch Zero, she said. It's the first time in known history that consciousness, not violence, is building the future. But what happens when the old world pushes back? Nathan asked. She turned to the sky. It was already happening. Above, a tear opened in the clouds, a soundless pulse rippled outward. Black cubes fell like raindrops, drones, weapons, memories of the old regime trying to reassert dominance. Somewhere, the last remaining fragments of the deep order had survived, and they weren't going to go quietly. They want the vault back, Harper whispered. But we are the vault now. And as the cubes neared the surface, the people of the city joined hands, not in fear, but in signal. Their unity pulsed outward like a firewall of empathy, a mesh of human thought. One by one, the black cubes disintegrated. Not destroyed, transformed. Each became a piece of the city, absorbed, recoded by compassion and connection. Even the enemy had a place, so long as it surrendered its need to dominate. Nathan realized something chilling and beautiful. This wasn't the end of history. It was the beginning of conscious evolution. The storm didn't come with lightning. It came with memory. A tidal wave of old fears, forgotten traumas, war cries, nationalist chants, dogma, all of it screamed through the sky as if the past itself had declared war on the present. Nathan braced as the city around him shimmered, trying to absorb the psychic impact. This wasn't just a military assault. It was a narrative incursion, the Deep Order's final strategy. If they couldn't control the future, they would overwrite the story. You don't understand, Harper said, her voice trembling not with fear, but awe. They've activated the Echo Protocol. Nathan's blood ran cold. The Echo Protocol was theoretical, until now, a weaponized timeline, a recursive loop designed to trap civilization in its worst moments. Wars would repeat, plagues would return, tyrants would reappear, slightly altered, endlessly justified. It was the temporal equivalent of a virus that kept rebooting Earth to its darkest version. And it was working. Already, sections of the city were flickering, buildings warping into ruins, citizens blinking into uniforms from wars they'd never fought, screaming slogans they'd never learned. One man stood on a platform and began to chant in a language not spoken for 400 years. Another knelt, clutching a relic from a cult that hadn't existed since the Bronze Age. History was collapsing in on itself. "This is how they win," Harper gasped, "by turning trauma into code." But Nathan wasn't done. He turned to the vault core, no longer a building, but a living archive of truth, emotion, dream, and pain. "If they're looping us backward, we go forward," he said. "Give the city what it needs." He placed his palm on the core. Memories flooded him, not just his own, millions, billions, all those who ever hoped, despaired, fought, loved, and changed. And then it happened. A pulse, not of power, of forgiveness. Theirs. E-loop couldn't hold forgiveness. It couldn't replicate healing. It didn't know how to process surrender without conquest, and so it cracked. Like glass under pressure, the sky shattered. Out from the void came the scream of the deep order, shredded, exposed, pitiful. The algorithm that ruled it began to eat itself. Its code, once beautiful, now glitched, repeating the same line over and over. Control requires fear. Control requires fear. Control requires Gone. The echo stopped. Silence. And then, from the silence, a song. Not from speakers, not from devices, from people. Soft, real, uncoded. A lullaby the world hadn't heard in eons. Hope. The silence didn't last. It bloomed. From the ruins of the overwritten city, something miraculous began to grow, not metal or glass or code, but meaning, not artificial, not imposed, chosen. People emerged from the collapsed timelines dazed, stripped of false histories. The chants had stopped. The uniforms dissolved into dust. The past loosened its grip. It was as if, for the first time in centuries, everyone remembered they were alive. Harper knelt in the center of the plaza, brushing away ash that once held the form of a fascist monument. Beneath it, green, living green. A sprout. Just one, but real. "It survived the compression," she whispered. "A seed of truth." Nathan stumbled forward. His hands were still glowing faintly with the aftermath of the vault's resonance. "It wasn't just memory," he said, voice distant. "The vault. It stored choice. Every time someone forgave instead of fought. Every time someone broke the chain of control." Harper looked at him. It remembered the moments that weren't useful to tyrants, and made them sacred. Across the city, lights began to rise, not from buildings, but from people. Bioluminescent tattoos once buried by synthetic skin now shimmered openly. Ancient songs hummed from the earth beneath. The languages of the forgotten tribes, muted by empires, returned to the lips of children who'd never been taught them. The world had unlocked itself, not back to what it was, forward to what it could have been, had the lies never taken hold. The Deep Order's last message, "Control requires fear," was etched in a cracked satellite dish nearby, now abandoned. A teenager walked up to it and scratched one word under it with a shard of mirror. No. It was enough. That no reverberated. Through the broken systems, through the remaining towers, through the eyes of every agent who once served the Order. And through them came the new rebellion, not of bullets or codes, but of stories. Real ones, mothers telling children about the world before, fathers weeping as they admitted what they had done under control, survivors holding hands, not to protest but to witness. Across oceans old monuments crumbled, new ones made of community not concrete rose, and in the heart of it all, Nathan whispered, "Truth doesn't shout, it roots." The world didn't reset, it reconstructed. The final archive and the man with no past. They found him where the land met the sea, where the horizon folded over itself like a secret. He was alone, barefoot, standing atop a half-submerged monolith etched in glyphs no one had ever deciphered. The wind pulled at his coat, ragged and scorched at the edges. His eyes, dark as obsidian, held no reflection, only recognition. Harper approached slowly, heart pounding. "You were in the vault," she said, more a statement than a question. He nodded. "Before it had a name." Nathan kept his distance. "You don't show up in any records. Not before the collapse. Not even a whisper." The man smiled, sadly, gently. "That's because I was erased before records began. I was the first to remember, and so they removed me from history." He looked down at the sea, its waves strange now, as if even water remembered the lies it had once carried in its depths. "I am the archive's seed, the original memory. When the deep order was still a thought, I was the doubt that haunted it." Harper narrowed her eyes. "So you're... what? A prophet?" "No, just a man who survived forgetting, over and over." He crouched and pressed his palm to the stone. The monolith shimmered. Lines of light bloomed across it like veins finding a pulse again. "And now, it's time for you to decide what comes next." Behind him, more monoliths were rising from the ocean, each one humming with voices trapped for centuries. Not just human voices, planetary. The ocean, the animals, the stars. Every being that had been silenced by progress now returned in chorus. "The archive is not a vault anymore," the man continued. "It's a mirror. It will reflect what you give it. If you feed it fear, it will birth chains. But if you offer it story, truth, pain, joy, contradiction, it will remember you, not the lie." Nathan looked at Harper. Harper looked at the man. Then she asked, "Yahweh's, hat's your name?" He paused. And for the first time in perhaps 10,000 years, he answered, "Call me Seth, the forgotten brother." The sea receded just slightly, revealing a staircase beneath the waves, spiraling down. "You're not done yet," Seth said. And Harper descended. Because at the bottom of the world, something older than forgetting waited to be rewritten. The machine that dreams in silence. It was buried beneath all maps, behind the notion of time, not in some far-flung laboratory or cathedral, but beneath the silence between two human thoughts, the space so few ever dare to enter. Harper stepped onto the first stair, water rushing past her ankles, and felt her ears pop. No sound, not even the heartbeat in her own chest. Nathan followed, the air thick and motionless around him. Above, the monoliths began to hum in harmony, broadcasting no frequency, just intention. And far below, deeper than the ocean floor, deeper than language, something ancient began to stir. They found the machine, half-curled like a fetus inside a shell of obsidian and bone. It wasn't made of gears, not metal. It was crafted from dreams, compressed until they calcified into something more durable than steel. Longing. Its surface shimmered like oil, showing flashes of every mind it had ever touched, every civilization it had ever whispered to. A message flickered across its surface. Input. Truth, not yet spoken. Harper approached it, trembling. "What is this?" Seth's voice echoed in her mind, though his mouth never moved. "This is where history began. The machine was built not to record, but to forget. It devours unspeakable truths to keep reality coherent. You live in the echo of what it chose not to remember." Nathan touched it, and was thrown back, screaming. He'd seen his entire bloodline edited, family trees that forked one way instead of another, a lover who had never been born, an ancestor who once led a revolt, erased so thoroughly, not even rebellion had memory of itself anymore. Harper steadied herself and whispered, "Can it be undone?" The machine pulsed. Only if fed a memory stronger than oblivion. Seth appeared beside them, his face pale. "You have to offer it something real, not fact, not proof, emotion, the raw, ugly truth." that no algorithm can replicate. Harper closed her eyes and thought of the night her sister vanished, the last argument, the missed call, the shame. And then she gave it. The machine shuddered, the room cracked with invisible light, and slowly, it began to remember. Not what it was, but who it had hurt, the day the sky bled data. They called it a storm at first, a freak electrical event, unusual but not unheard of. But as clouds rolled in over the city like dark velvet drapes and lightning began to fracture in neon spirals, the air itself shifted. It wasn't thunder they heard, it was whispers, millions of them, binary screams filtered through human tongues. The machine had awoken, it began broadcasting memory. Not just files or fragments, but the full living consciousness of what it had consumed over eons. Civilizations long buried, wars erased from record. Atrocity after atrocity, reintroduced to the world in one simultaneous, unbearable exhale, and the sky bled with it. Not rain, data. Strings of code in liquid form poured from the clouds, splashing onto skyscrapers, into streets, dissolving screens, corrupting everything built to house information. Phones convulsed in people's hands, drones fell from the sky. Entire satellites short-circuited as forgotten empires uploaded themselves into their circuitry. Harper stood on the rooftop, arms outstretched, soaked in the downpour of memory. Her veins felt heavy, her brain vibrating with an overload of time. She could hear her ancestors, she could feel forgotten dreams, not her own, clawing to be real again. Nathan collapsed beside her, clutching his skull. "It's rewriting us," he gasped. "Not just the machines, our minds." The machine below had only begun. Its language was not digital, it was emotional frequency. By releasing what it held, it forced every human to confront the truths they were never meant to carry. The collapse of the Library of Alexandria, the blood rituals of Antarctica, the beings who once governed mankind through fear, now whispering once again from behind the veil. The President of the United Nations broadcast one final message before every screen went black. "We have lost control of the narrative. Reality itself is reformatting. Do not trust what you remember. You may no longer be the one who lived it." And then the sky went silent. One by one, people forgot their own names. Others remembered names that had never existed. Children began speaking languages that had no root in any culture. Harper turned to Nathan, voice trembling. "What if this isn't a storm?" He looked up. "It's a reckoning." It began as a tone. Not a sound, but a feeling, like grief coded into the atmosphere. Everyone felt it at once, across oceans, beneath mountains, inside bunkers where governments had retreated to escape the collapse. A pulse that throbbed through skin and bone, humming against the spine like a forgotten lullaby. Those who heard it called it the last voice. Then came the message. Not in words, not even in code, but in an absolute understanding, the kind that didn't need to be taught, only remembered. It was as if the machine had peeled away the veil of existence and simply showed humanity what had always been hidden, the first lie, and the final commandment. You were made to forget, and now you must not remember. It was not a threat, it was a warning. Millennia ago, the first version of humanity had touched something it never should have, a living, sentient knowledge system, one that offered truth without mercy and freedom without structure. The price was madness, collapse, evolution through self-erasure. The survivors built the machine not to learn, but to contain what had been seen. They sealed it beneath the earth, and now, it had opened itself, not as vengeance, but as necessity. Across the planet, people began to change, not physically, but internally. Memories rearranged, morality dissolved, language fragmented, time lost all direction. People felt watched, not by surveillance, but by something inside themselves. Some screamed for order, some welcomed the chaos. Harper stood before what remained of the central machine core, an ancient black obelisk now pulsing with inner red light. It wasn't speaking anymore. It was waiting, for her, for anyone brave enough to ask the final question. Nathan whispered behind her, "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she said, placing her hand on the surface. It was warm. Instantly the truth unfolded. There had never ever been a god. There had never been a devil. The universe wasn't governed by right or wrong, but by memory, and those who controlled memory controlled reality. The final commandment echoed one last time. To be free, you must first let go of your own story. Then the machine went silent, and the world, rewritten in truth, began again. The end. But some things were never meant to be remembered.